sat frozen as my son raised a document in front of the entire family and accused me of stealing his mother's fortune. People I'd known for decades turned and stared at me. Then my sister-in-law stood up and demanded that I hand over control of my late wife's estate 6 months after I buried my wife. My own family had put me on trial. What hurt the most wasn't the accusation. It was realizing they had planned it together. Let me take you back to how it all started. My name is Ethan Walker. I was 67 years old when my wife Claire passed away. For 35 years, she was my partner in every sense of the word. When I started my construction business, there were times we barely had enough money to cover the mortgage. I worked long hours and my wife handled everything else. She kept the books, raised our children, paid the bills, and somehow made our small house feel like the safest place in the world. We built everything together. The business grew. The debts disappeared. The savings grew. Life became comfortable. Then cancer arrived and took all of that certainty away. The day I buried my wife felt like someone had removed the foundation from underneath me. After the funeral, I walked through the house and heard silence everywhere. No television in the living room, no humming from the kitchen, no voice asking me if I wanted coffee. Just silence. For the first few weeks, family came around often. My son Ryan stopped by. My daughter Emily called almost every day. My wife's sister Karen checked on me constantly. At the time, I thought they were worried about me. Looking back, I think they were worried about something else. About a month after the funeral, Karen started asking questions. At first, they sounded harmless. How's the estate process going? Have the lawyers finished everything? How are the trust accounts being handled? I answered politely. After all, my wife had named me executor of her estate. It was my responsibility to make sure her wishes were followed exactly. But the questions kept coming. Every visit somehow ended with a discussion about money, property, investments, inheritance. One afternoon, my son came over to help me organize the garage. We spent an hour moving boxes. Then out of nowhere, he asked, "Dad, how long does it normally take before inheritance money gets distributed?" I stopped what I was doing. "Why?" He shrugged without looking at me. "Just wondering." I remember studying his face. Something felt off. Not enough to start an argument, just enough to make me uncomfortable. A few days later, I walked into my daughter's kitchen while several relatives were talking. The second I entered the room, everyone stopped, not gradually, immediately. One cousin suddenly became fascinated with her coffee mug, and Uncle looked out the window. Nobody met my eyes. The silence only lasted a few seconds, but it was long enough for me to know I had interrupted a conversation about me. As the weeks passed, Karen became bolder. She started talking as if my wife's estate belonged to the entire family. "Your wife always wanted everyone taken care of. She believed in sharing. She wouldn't want money tied up forever." I usually changed the subject. There wasn't much else to say. Nothing was being hidden. Nothing was being delayed. The estate process was moving, exactly as the attorneys instructed. Everything was being handled according to my wife's wishes. Still, the comments continued. By the 4th month, my son had changed. Phone calls became shorter. Visits became less frequent. Whenever we spoke, I felt distance between us, not anger, not yet something colder, suspicion, like he had started believing things about me that he hadn't said out loud. Then Karen called. She wanted to organize a large remembrance dinner for my wife. Family from both sides would attend. At first, I declined. I was tired of gatherings focused on grief, but Karen kept pushing. "It's what your wife would have wanted." Eventually, I agreed. I wish I hadn't. The moment I arrived, something felt wrong. People smiled. People greeted me, but it didn't feel natural. Conversations stopped when I approached. Several relatives avoided eye contact. Others kept glancing at me when they thought I wasn't looking. My daughter looked nervous. My son barely spoke. I couldn't explain it. But the room felt tense. Dinner started normally. People shared stories. They laughed about old memories. For a few minutes, I actually relaxed. Then my son stood up. He unfolded a document. The room became quiet. "Dad," he said, clearing his throat, "I think everyone deserves to know the truth." I felt my stomach tighten. What truth? He lifted the paper. The truth about Mom's estate. Every head turned toward me. My son looked nervous, but determined. We found evidence that Dad has been hiding a final amendment to Mom's wishes. For a moment I thought I had misheard him. What? My wife's sister immediately stood beside him. The timing was so perfect it felt rehearsed. My son continued. "This document shows Mom wanted Dad removed as executor." Whispers spread around the room. I stared at him, then at the paper, then back at him. "What are you talking about?" Karen folded her arms. Claire was worried. I looked directly at her. Worried about what? She didn't hesitate. Worried that she trusted the wrong person? The room went silent. That sentence hit me harder than I expected. Not because I believed it, because it came from family. My own son looked at me and said, "If Mom changed her wishes, why didn't you tell anyone?" I felt my jaw tighten. "Because she never changed them." Karen stepped forward. "Then explain the document." Copies were passed around the table. People began reading. I watched expressions change: confusion, shock, anger. One cousin shook his head. An uncle frowned at me. Nobody asked whether the document was real. Nobody asked for proof. They simply assumed I was guilty. Then the attack became personal. Karen claimed my wife had lost confidence in me. During her illness, my son questioned whether I had manipulated decisions while she was sick. Relative asked whether I had hidden information. Another suggested I was abusing my authority. The accusations kept coming, one after another. Nobody wanted answers. They wanted someone to blame. Then, Karen delivered the worst accusation of the night. She looked around the room before speaking. "Claire discovered things before she died." I stared at her. "What things?" She paused, then said quietly, "Things that disappointed her." The room became silent again. I knew exactly what she was doing. She wasn't attacking my finances anymore. She was attacking my marriage. 35 years together. And now she was suggesting that my wife died, disappointed in me. That hurt more than anything else said that night. I stood up. Nobody stopped me. Nobody defended me. Not my relatives, not my friends, not even my son. I drove home alone. That night, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the document. Hours passed. The house was dark, and slowly, something inside me changed. Until then, I had convinced myself there had been some misunderstanding. Maybe grief, maybe confusion, maybe bad information. But as I looked at that paper, I realized something. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a setup. Someone had spent months preparing it. The questions, the whispers, the distance, the accusations, none of it happened by accident. For the first time, I admitted the truth. This wasn't about family. This wasn't about grief. It was about money. The next morning, I called my wife's attorney. Richard had worked with us for years. I drove straight to his office. He studied the document carefully. Then he looked up. "Ethan, this is fake," I exhaled slowly. "You sure?" 100%. He pointed out mistakes. Incorrect legal references. Invalid witness signatures. Formatting. Problems. Then he checked official records. The document had never been filed. Legally, it didn't exist. It was a forgery. The accusation should have ended there, but it didn't. 2 days later, Karen called me. She sounded calm, almost pleased with herself. When I told her the document was fake, she barely reacted. Instead, she said, "That's not the only proof." My stomach tightened. "What proof?" She lowered her voice. "Claire left letters." I didn't answer. "Letters explaining what she found out about you." Then she hung up. I sat there, staring at my phone. Part of me thought she was bluffing. Part of me wondered how far she was willing to go. A week later, I got my answer. Richard called. "There's something your wife left behind." I drove to his office. Immediately, he unlocked a secure cabinet and removed a sealed folder. My name was written on the front in my wife's handwriting. The moment I saw it, my chest tightened. Inside were emails, notes, recordings, documents. My wife had collected them during the final months of her illness. At first, I didn't understand why. Then I started reading, and everything changed. My wife had been documenting Karen's behavior. Conversations, emails, meetings, pressure, manipulation. The deeper I went, the worse it became. Karen had spent months trying to influence estate decisions, questioning inheritance plans, suggesting changes, encouraging family members to challenge me. Then, I found a recording. My wife's sister was speaking with my son. The date was months before my wife passed away. I listened in silence. Karen told my son he deserved more. She convinced him that I couldn't be trusted. She suggested I was controlling everything, planted doubts one conversation at a time. I sat there staring at the table. My son wasn't the mastermind. He had been manipulated, used. Every strange conversation suddenly made sense. Every cold look, every accusation, every question. Karen had been building this for months. Then I found my wife's final. I unfolded it carefully. It read, "If you're reading this, someone may be trying to challenge what we built together. I trust you completely. Never let anyone convince you. Otherwise, I couldn't keep reading." Put the letter down and cried. Not because I felt betrayed, because my wife trusted me until the end. The biggest lie Karen told died in that moment. A week later, I called another family meeting. Everyone came. Karen looked confident. My son looked uneasy. This time I sat at the head of the table. This time, nobody was putting me on trial. I started with the forged document. Richard explained why it was fake. Karen tried to interrupt. I stopped her. Then, I played the recordings one after another. The room became quieter. People stopped looking at me. They started looking at her. Then I showed the emails, messages, revealing how she coordinated conversations, planned the pressure campaign, encouraged accusations, organized the memorial ambush. The truth was impossible to ignore. Karen stopped talking for the first time. She had nothing to say. Then I read my wife's note aloud. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. My daughter wiped tears from her face. My son stared at the floor. Karen couldn't even look up. When I finished, I looked directly at her. "You used my wife's death for money." Silence. "Manipulated my son." "Nothing." "You tried to destroy my reputation." She never answered. She didn't need to. Everyone in that room already knew. I informed the family that Karen was removed from all estate matters. Attorneys were reviewing fraud claims. Future communication would go through legal channels. Nobody argued the fight was over. Karen left first. Nobody followed her after everyone else left. My son stayed behind. We sat across from each other. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, he looked up. "I'm sorry, Dad." His voice shook. "I really thought I was protecting Mom." I nodded slowly. "No." He wiped his eyes. "But you never asked me if it was true." He looked down. There was no defense for that. Trust takes years to build, a few minutes to break. Months later, the legal issues were settled. My wife's wishes remained protected. My reputation was restored. Karen faced the consequences of her actions, and for the first time since losing my wife, I started thinking about my future instead of my grief. Sold the family home not because I wanted to forget, because I wanted to move forward. Bought a small lakeside property my wife had always loved. One evening, I stood on the deck watching the water. The moving truck disappeared down the road. The lawsuits were finished. The estate was secure. The chaos was finally over. My son had visited earlier that day. He apologized again. This time, I accepted it. Not because everything was fixed, because rebuilding trust has to begin somewhere. As the sun lowered over the lake, I stood there alone. No accusations, no demands, no pressure. Nobody telling me what I owed them. Nobody treating me like a wallet. Nobody trying to take control of my life. I looked across the water and thought about my wife's final letter. In the end, she left me something more valuable than money. She left me the truth, and that truth gave me back my dignity, my authority, and my freedom. The people who cared about the fortune lost access to it. The woman who truly loved me left me with everything I actually needed to move forward.